just kind of to start, could you give like a short introduction of yourself and maybe some ways that the quarantine has affected you and your job in the past couple of months?
Sure. So my name is Mary Lou Kandigian. I teach AP Statistics and Business Intelligence and Analytics. I'm affiliated with AIT, but I teach students from all the schools except APA because I only teach seniors and their seniors aren't on campus. So we were all rushed into online teaching on March 13th. It was a Friday, I believe, and we had one-day intense training on how we were going to manage it. We at AIT, we've been using Google Classroom and a lot of the features that come along with Google Classroom for years. Since Mrs. Gillanella came, she made us do it when she first came. So we were kind of already set with that kind of thing, like, posting assignments in Google Classroom and even giving, quizzes and Google Forms and all that. We were pretty good with that, so it wasn't too bad for us. Google Meeting was something new, and the Zoom meeting was something new. I tried both of them to see what I liked the best. But it was a very different way to teach that I don't like. Although luckily, we didn't really have much teaching to do in AP Statistics because we had finished the content that they were going to test on. They eliminated a couple of the units that we hadn't gotten to, so we didn't have to worry about that. So that was a break. So really all we had to do was review. So it really wasn't that hard for me. And business intelligence was, once the third marking period was over, we had already planned to do a joint fourth marking period, like major project with global finance. So that too wasn't that difficult. It was just checking in with the kids, keeping them on pace and finding out what they were doing. And we kind of did this thing we called AIT Business Olympiad, and we had different events. So it wasn't too hard. If we have to go back in the fall though, and I'm going to have to teach online to kids that I don't know, like I don't know what they look like, I don't know how they are, that's going to be really hard. But yeah, we'll all do our best, but that's going to be really hard because it's hard to get feedback. Like a lot of the students, most of the students, all the students didn't really want to show themselves on video. We had to make it optional, and many students didn't want to speak out loud, so they were just putting things in the chat, which is okay. But when you're not seeing someone's face, it's really hard to teach, because you get a lot of information from students' faces, like, oh, I'm totally lost. I don't know what she's talking about. Or you lost me altogether and I'm now thinking about something else. Or, yeah, I get that. This is great. So you lose that kind of nonverbal communication, which makes it really hard to do. But we'll get by.
So when it came to teaching this time around, would you say that was the biggest challenge, the fact that you couldn't see people's faces and get the reception that you usually get in person?
Yes, that was the toughest thing. And then I think for the students too, like my normal review process would have been a lot of collaboration. And, I had like certain activities set up that would make it a little more interesting than just like, here are 3 problems, do them, and then we'll check the answers, which is kind of what we had to do online. So we weren't able to do that collaboration that well online. That's something I'm going to think about, how I can reproduce that kind of idea. Business intelligence kids did a lot of collaboration. They managed to do their group work like however, texting each other or however they communicate. They figured out ways to communicate with each other. There's not as much pressure in business intelligence, so a lot of times we had to extend, deadlines a week or 2 just because that's how it was working out. But in AP Statistics, getting ready for the exam, we can't really extend the deadlines. Like, you have to do it and you have to do it by this day. So yeah, I missed that part too, the collaboration.
In some ways, like we heard from Ms. Varga that like ABC News was trying to reach out to UCBTS, like praising us for our transition to the online learning. So we were wondering, do you think, should UCVTS, our transition to online learning, how did you feel about it? Did you think it was like a smooth process? And
The first couple weeks when we were doing 5 days of classes was crazy, and trying to adapt to how this was all working. I have to admit there was one day that I didn't even change out of my pajamas because I didn't have time. I'd get up at 6, start working, and just work through until 9 o'clock at night, trying to like organize lessons and grade things and communicate with people. So it was those first couple weeks were really hard. When they switched to the Wednesday advisory day, giving everybody like a day to breathe, that made life so much easier. That was a really good decision. I don't think that in the long run it hurt how much progress we were making, but I think it gave us all a day to like catch our breath. So that was good. That was a good idea. I think for UCVTS, everyone has Chromebooks. Some schools are not that lucky where everyone has a device. I know they had taken a survey about who has internet access and who doesn't, and they were able to provide hotspots for people who didn't have internet access. So that was good. So I think technology-wise, we were ahead of a lot of other districts that didn't have either of those things ready to go. And then I think, we just have great students because other teachers, I belong to a lot of teacher groups like on Twitter and stuff, and we, collaborate. And a lot of teachers were saying, in other parts of the country that my students aren't showing up. They're not coming to class. They are not doing their work. They're not doing anything. I reach out to them. I get no response. They just kind of fell off the face of the earth. And a lot of teachers were saying that. And I was like, ooh, I don't even know if I want to say, because I had the best attendance. It was almost perfect attendance. There was rarely anybody absent. And if they were absent, it was like they're having a college visit or, they had a reason and they would let me know. And that was great. So for the most part, there were a couple exceptions, but for the most part, kids were coming to class all the time. They were submitting their work all the time. And so that helped too, that you guys are great students.
Varga, if you could kind of give a short introduction of yourself and maybe how the quarantine has affected your job.
My name is Liz Varga. I'm a school counselor at the Academy for Allied Health Sciences. I've been a school counselor for 13 years. How has the pandemic affected my job at school? It's been challenging. We've had a lot of students whose parents work in healthcare, and we've had students having to deal with remote learning and people being stuck at home and unable to connect with people. And those are the challenges that we have faced since we started working and going to school remotely.
We asked Ms. Kandigian this before, but Ms. Varga, if you would also want to weigh in, maybe what was the biggest challenge for you when adjusting to the online learning experience? How you personally and maybe students that have come to you, what were some of the challenges?
My own personal challenges dealing with remote learning were not very difficult, actually. I did my job for quite a bit of time, and I feel like I can do my job in any sort of an environment. It was a little bit difficult not being able to call a teacher and have a student come to class if I needed to talk to them immediately. I had to be a little more persistent, but I found a way to reach those students that I really needed to talk to. So I wouldn't say that it was so much of a challenge. I had to change the way I thought and the way I approached problems. For the students, I think there were a wide variety of issues. I think it was difficult for them to learn certain types of classes in a remote environment. Maybe a math class was more difficult, or a class that was more prone to discussion, like a history or English class. may have been more difficult. Overall, I think the students did a very good job. Sometimes maybe they had a little bit of trouble getting to class on time. But overall, I think the students did a pretty good job. And I'm looking at grades, and I can tell that we've been fairly successful, very successful at what we've done.
Students that have been struggling in the classes, how are some ways that like either you've given extra help or helped them cope with these stressful circumstances?
I had a couple students that were either not coming to class, not coming on time, not doing any work. As it was hard for me to contact them because I was occupied all day. They weren't really responding to emails or like Google Classroom messages. So it was very difficult for me. So I had to get the counselor involved to intervene, because it seemed like the counselor had a better ability to get in touch with the students. So that was my experience. And it was just a handful of kids that I had an issue with, but I had to get the counselors involved in every case to have them respond to somebody because they weren't responding to me.
I think I had some of the same issues that Ms. Kandigian had as well. Fortunately, I have responsibility for the National Honor Society tutors. And when we went into remote learning, the fabulous team at NHS enacted tutoring remotely. We also had like a drop-in tutoring. So those services were put in place right away for students who needed help. That's one thing that we did and were able to do. I had an exceptional NHS team who really took the ball and ran with that quickly. Also, sometimes I had to get in touch with the parents. Sometimes that took days. When we went to the Wednesday all co-curricular all day, I think it was a little more helpful because students then had an opportunity where they were freed up to get help. And there were no more excuses at that point. If they needed help, so they could go to NHS. They now had Wednesday where they could meet with the tutor. And if we had to engage the parents. Again, this is about us figuring out a way in a new environment and being persistent and being able to accomplish the goals that we had to.
So we've heard a lot about student struggles, but if you guys are willing to maybe talk a little bit about your own mental health and your own coping within this time, how is it for you during the transition period, and maybe some strategies that you used?
Well, for me, it was good that I was very busy at work. That helped me because my brain was occupied all day, every day, and on the weekend, I was tired from the work week. But I also made some concerted efforts to do some things for myself because I knew that being homebound was not my norm. I'm an extroverted personality type. I like being around people. I need to be around people. So I really had to use some of my own advice on myself. I reached out to old friends. I reconnected with my best friend from kindergarten. Now we talk at least 2-3 times a week. It's so great to be back in touch with her. And it's not that we ever lost touch, but now we're communicating regularly. I set a goal to start learning to speak Italian. All my cousins speak Italian, but my parents never taught us. They only spoke Italian when they didn't want us to know what we were talking about. So I signed up for Babbel. And Miss Gasso, who's the counselor over at APA, is fluent in Italian. So she was my coach. When I got stuck, I would go to her. So I made an effort to keep myself busy, knowing myself and knowing the things that I needed to do. I also had to reach out for help. I'm here alone. My kids, just because of the timing of when everything shut down, we all ended up in different places so we wouldn't contaminate each other. My son lived in New York City. My daughter was commuting into New York from her apartment to go to school. And we were the last ones out of school. So none of us wanted to be around each other. So I was alone dealing with all this, and I had to ask for help. You know, if one of my friends was going to the store, I would say, hey, can you pick up XYZ for me? And that was a change. I'm a pretty independent person. It was difficult for me to ask for help, but I did do that too. So I think, you know, knowing yourself, knowing the things that you need to keep yourself whole were important to identify, and then think of creative ways to do that, and then reach out to people. You know, I had some days where that were very difficult. I thought that really I was going to have to bust loose out of the house and run around the neighborhood because I couldn't take it anymore. But, you know, figured a way around that. So we have a group of mothers that we all met when our kids were in kindergarten. We started Zooming every Sunday night because we used to always go out to dinner at least once a month. So we turned it into a weekly Zoom call. So things like that, just being creative, understanding what you need. And those were the things that really helped me to get through the worst of it. I did have some bad days, you know, I'll freely admit that. And I'm not ashamed of that. It's important to understand that those things happen, but I knew I could get out of it. And now my son's staying here with me and I have to cook dinner every night and I'm not happy.
So, took a while for me to stop being so worried about my kids, about my students, about my neighbors, about my family, my extended family. I was worried about everyone. I had a niece that came home from study abroad in London, and London was kind of bad at the time. She came home, she had it. She had coronavirus, but she just, you know, it was fine. She didn't have to go to the hospital. It was like, 2 weeks of feeling bad, staying at home, and she was fine. And I don't think her parents and her sister didn't seem to catch it. So that was good. Obviously, my daughter Jill, who's a nurse and has been working with COVID patients since this all began, worry about her a lot in a lot of ways. Like I worried about her, catching the virus. That would be bad. I worried about her just getting so worn down and getting sick with something else because she was just so worn down. Worried about her mental health because she couldn't sleep. She experienced some pretty, horrible things and she's a very empathetic person. She's like the perfect person to be a nurse, and she's very empathetic, and everything affects her. Like, the worst thing was seeing people die alone and not being able to help them because she was busy. She would have stayed with them if she could have, but she couldn't. No one could. There wasn't anyone. Aides weren't allowed in the rooms because they didn't have enough PPE. So aides couldn't go in. Only the nurses could go in. But the nurses in ICU had 2 or 3 patients to care for who were all seriously ill. And so she couldn't stay with one of them. So that really was hard for her. She, there were other things too that happened that were, hard for her to cope with. So I worried about her. I have another daughter who lives in Brooklyn. So she's in the midst of it. She was, taking public transportation, working at the Navy Yard, making jewelry and with a group of people, and they were all sent home. So she's been home with her husband and her 2 new cats. They got 2 cats, so that's keeping them pretty happy. So she's okay. She's started back to work last week. They're going to work 3 days a week for, indefinitely. So they're keeping like half the people come 3 days and half the people come the other 2 days. And that's how they're managing. Then my other daughter is in Reno, and Nevada is actually not too bad. And they never really had to have a total shutdown. Restaurants stayed open, but they had to be, distanced, and, they have to wear masks, but it hasn't really, hopefully they haven't been hit hard with it. So what do I do to cope with it? So because of all that, worrying about them, worrying about my students, I knew that there were some of my students who were dealing with the illness themselves. They had it. Their family members had it. One student's father passed away from it. So, you know, I'm always worrying about the students too and their families. But I try to be, I used to go to the gym. I used to go to the gym like 3 times a week, so I can't do that. But luckily they have online workouts, so I try to do those, trying to stick with 3 days a week. It's really hard though. And I walk every day, taking it like about an hour walk every day whenever I can. So that's kind of how I deal with it. Physical exercise. And my husband's here. I have my husband who, we keep each other in check.
It was very difficult worrying about the students. I was afraid every time I had to make a phone call home, what I have to hear. And I too was worried about so many people. I have a lot of doctors in my family and nurses, and I worried about them a lot. And it was very difficult.
Yeah.
Well, it's great to hear about the different coping mechanisms, and thank you for sharing your stories, your personal struggles. To kind of end it on a positive note, so what is kind of a thing that you've learned from this experience that you'll take with you? And if there's any advice you'd want to give to other teachers, counselors, or students?
I think one thing that I told myself frequently was no matter how long this lasts, it's temporary. Even if it lasts a year, it's temporary. And Mrs. Shear, who taught at Allied for many, many, many years, I still keep in touch with her. She said to me one day, we're one step closer, one day closer to this being over. I thought about that every morning. Even if it's a year long,
Yeah.
we're one day closer to it being over. And that collectively, as a group of people, friends, students, parents, family, if we stick together, you know, we can get each other through it and help each other get through it. And I was empowered and amazed, first of all, with all of our students making masks, students starting this website, students who still, after all of this, still want to go into healthcare. I am amazed with all of you. You are all heroic and courageous, and that gives me hope.
So for teachers, I would just say to give yourself a break, that you don't have to do everything that you think of, because if you do, you're going to be working 20 hours a day. Even like, you know, there was a little bit of a suggestion that we should kind of be in touch with all of our students every day individually. It's like, okay, I'll try that. But messaging 120 students every day takes hours. So I think I did it once or twice, and it's like, I can't do it. So you can't contact every student every day. And, you know, there are other things. You just have to, like, do what you can do. I don't have little kids at home. I don't know how teachers who had little kids at home managed. God bless them. But you have to find some way to detach yourself, whether that be reading, exercising, socializing, whatever, you know, whatever, doing Zooms with friends and family. We did that too. We've done that. I just know that when this is over, I'm really not much of a hugger. I'm not a huggy person, but I'm going to be after this. I am going to hug everybody as much as I can after this is over, because I really miss that a lot. So that's nice too, when you see people going out of their way to help others. It's just so heartwarming.
Thank you guys so much for sharing your experiences with us. It was really great to see kind of like the teacher and counselor perspective of this. Thank you so much for sharing with us, and we definitely want to get this onto our website for the rest of the UCVTS community to kind of hear your perspective.
Yeah, it was good. Thanks.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Nice seeing you, Mrs. Varga. Bye.